What is affirmative action?
Oh, affirmative action. Let me tell you something, man. That's just another thing that these do to steal from the great white man. I mean, they can't even get an education because they're too busy being lazy, living off government handouts, and living in the projects with their 5 baby mamas. So, does that answer your question?
What is affirmative action?
Wait a minute, my brother. You want me to talk about the real important issues surrounding the black community? Nah, my brother. I'd rather talk about how gay people are ruining the black community and the black family by literally just existing. And I'd also like to talk about my new school that I'm building in Africa, if you don't mind.
What is affirmative action?
Affirmative action was a set of procedures designed to eliminate unlawful discrimination among applicants, remedy the result of such prior discrimination, and prevent such discrimination from happening in the future. And yet, unironically, was being used by people to push anti-blackness. Wanna know how it happened? Well, keep watching the video, you dumb f***. Log 001. Will the people watching this video watch the entire video before they leave a comment? Or will they watch the first 5 minutes of the video and then judge the entire video based on that 5 minutes that they watched? I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Okay, look, I haven't worn this fit since I graduated high school back in 2021. And the only reason why this cap is on my head right now is because it's getting held in with like 2 bobby pins on the side, so like, yeah, I just had to make it work, y'all. So yeah, let's get the show on the road. Hi, I'm Think Peace Tribe, the only 5'4" YouTuber on this app that speaks real and thinks that I Can't Help It is Michael Jackson's best song. I have the energy of a film student who opens a short film with an alarm clock shot in a 4:3 aspect ratio. I think that the 1978 Wiz movie is a great litmus test to see who hates black people and excellent set designs. And today, we're going to be talking about how affirmative action pushed anti-blackness. And with this one, I'm going to try something different. I'll be talking about 2 main stories with affirmative action and how they correlate with each other in ways that you can't imagine. Because what's happened with this and what's currently happening with this is kind of the most funniest thing ever, and there's so much to unpack here. And I have so much to say, so many people to call out, and so little time to expose y'all for the anti-black you really are. So let's get this started, shall we? And yes, I know this is where you start to get bored as I dump all this backstory and information on you, so I'll provide some stimulation as a compromise. Okay, so here's the situation with the first story I'll be getting into. So on June 8th, 2023, Fox News posted a story surrounding a special called The Diversity Verdict, titled Asian American Student with 1590 SAT Score Rejected by 6 Elite Colleges, Blames Affirmative Action. John Wang applied to MIT, Caltech, Princeton, Harvard, Carnegie Mellon, and UC Berkeley with a 1590 SAT score and a 4.65 GPA. And we'll get into those schools in a minute, but let me show you what he had to say about why he got rejected from these schools.
The bias against Asian applicants is real and wrong, says Students for Fair Admissions, which John learned about through a relative.
I read up on their cause, and I found that it really resonated with me, so I joined the organization as well. I gave them my test scores and a few other things about me, and then they must have ran the model on that, and then Edward Bloom told me my results, and so they said I had a 20% chance of gaining admission to Harvard as an Asian American, and then a 95% chance as an African American.
Yeah, you gotta love the classic narrative of black people being used as scapegoats where we somehow, someway get blamed for everything, meanwhile what's actually going on gets put under the radar. Now I can talk about many situations like this one, but I highlight this as one of the main stories that I'm discussing because of how blatant the anti-black narrative is being pushed here, and trust me, it was done on purpose. Because I mean, the way that people talk about affirmative action, you think that black people are just applying into these top universities with 2.0 GPAs and are automatically getting in based off their race alone, which is just not the case whatsoever. And that's not even how affirmative action works or where it came from.
According to the American Association for Access, Equity, and Diversity,
in 1961, President John F. Kennedy's Executive Order EO 10925 used affirmative action for the first time by instructing federal contractors to take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are treated equally without regard to race, color, religion, sex, or national origin.
So basically, black people and other minorities were being discriminated in the workplace, and even white women were being discriminated in the workplace, and affirmative action was created to somewhat fix that. The way that it worked for schools was supposed, keyword supposed, to work the same. And look at the inequalities that certain minority groups faced and took note of that in the application process. It is not just getting accepted by itself, it's SAT/application waivers and providing necessary scholarships because these schools are expensive and most of these kids can't afford it. It was supposed to recognize the differences between a kid who went to a private school, had private tutors, been studying for the SAT all his life, and got a 1600 SAT score, and let's say a kid from Cleveland Avenue who has a single parent in the household, has to work a part-time job, couldn't afford to buy the SAT or ACT books, and still got a 1590 SAT score. It was supposed to recognize that you're gonna have to go to majority black/POC areas and recruit certain kids that could be a great fit for these top universities that you never know about if you didn't go to them directly.
I went to a school no one had ever heard of in Denver, Colorado, in a small suburb. I didn't go to Exeter or Andover. I didn't have college test prep. I just happened to be really nerdy and smart and have really good grades and good SAT scores. But someone came to Denver, Colorado to look for me. A Harvard recruiter flew to Denver, and I met up with her at the Village Inn restaurant and did a pre-interview to get to pull me into Harvard. I was pulled in, and the schools like Harvard and Yale that I got into affirmatively. And it was literally not saying we're going to take an unqualified person and put them in Harvard. We're going to take a very qualified person who we would never know existed and put them in Harvard. That's how I got there. That's how Ketanji got there. That's how Justice Jackson, I should say. Justice Jackson got there. It's how Clarence Thomas got there. But the minute I arrived from my majority black little town, Montbello in Denver, to Harvard, the first week or two that I was in class, my presence was questioned by white people. I was in this big conference class where some white students stood up and said, those students, the black students, they're only here because of affirmative action. It became a huge argument that we all ended up having. This was freshman year. I had never had my academic credentials questioned. I had never had anyone question whether I was intelligent until I got to Harvard. And it was a defining point of my experience there. It's why I really was one of the many reasons I was miserable there my freshman year. You felt completely out of place, and people keep telling you shouldn't be here, and yet some of the people I went to school with were far less smart than me or the other black folk there. They got in because their daddy and their granddaddy. I went to school with somebody whose name was on one of the buildings. You're going to school with people whose names are on the buildings, who are third and fourth generation legacies, whose parents pumped money into Harvard to get them in. But that affirmative action is okay with this majority. They said that the people who benefited from slavery, their descendants, who are so far ahead of black folk in terms of opportunity that we'll never catch up to them. I don't care how many Oprahs we get. Those people's affirmative action is A-okay because those people can pay for fancy trips for them. But you people who want to get in just because of your brains, but you're not from a legacy, too bad. You can't come in.
It was supposed to recognize that if a white person and a black person had a similar transcript, that the white person likely worked less harder than the black person because they have more access to resources and opportunities than the black person. And that's not me making it seem like, oh, black people are lazy, black people aren't smart, black people can't go to college on their own, they need help. Because in reality, black women are the most educated group in the US, and that's just real. When your people go through 400 years of slavery, sharecropping, have to migrate constantly after technical slavery ends because terrorist organizations like the KKK and hostility against people that look like you are so tense, when your people go through the black codes, the destruction of thriving black communities, Jim Crow laws, redlining, the war on drugs, the prison industrial complex, the school to prison pipeline, over-policing, police brutality, gentrification, discrimination based off of the follicles that come out of your own hair, and more, affirmative action is really the bare minimum. And circling back to John Wang, I just want y'all to pay attention to what context is being left out, what isn't being said, and just overall watch how people talk about affirmative action. Cause when I saw this story, I asked myself, what was bro's essay looking like? Was he involved in any extracurriculars? Any clubs besides golf? Because when you look at the story, none of this is mentioned. And they act like his numbers should have gotten him into these schools alone, when that's just not the case whatsoever. Like, newsflash, you're applying to some of the most elite universities in the world, where people have similar SAT scores and GPAs like you. Harvard has a 4% acceptance rate. So if you don't do anything to make yourself stand out, you won't get accepted. It wasn't black people's fault you didn't get in. You didn't get in because you're fucking boring.
Oh, call declined. Embarrassing.
And let's not even talk about how some of the schools that he applied to and used as an example don't even use affirmative action. Because he applied to MIT, Caltech, Princeton, Harvard, Carnegie Mellon, and UC Berkeley. And California hasn't used affirmative action since 1996. So affirmative action isn't why you weren't accepted into Caltech and UC Berkeley. Methinks your essay had the personality of a wet mop. Bro made the MGK or Lil Xan equivalent of an essay. But, oh, if he was black, he had a 95% chance of getting in. Yeah, keep telling yourself that, buddy. We can all be delusional at times. Yeah, yeah. And I think that statistic, which was revealed to him in a dream, is wild. Cause you wouldn't know if your spot was taken by a black person unless their full application was disclosed to you, which it wasn't. And it's extremely disingenuous to act like black people are just taking up so many spots at these schools, acting like we make up a majority at these schools when it's not happening. These schools are called PWIs, predominantly white institutions, for a reason. Like, words do in fact have meaning to them. No, cause actually, since you want to blame black people so bad, let's go school by school and look at the black population at the 6 schools he applied to, since if he was black, he had a 95% chance of getting in. According to a mission site,
at MIT, the enrolled student population is composed as follows: 3.93% Black or African American students, 0.116% American Indian or Alaska Native students, 19.7% Asian students, 9.77% Hispanic or Latino students, 4.74% 2 or more races students, and 28.7% white students. At Caltech, 29.1% of the population is white, 22.9% of the population is Asian, 10.6% of the population is Hispanic or Latino, 5.36% of the population is 2 or more races, 1.03% of the population is Black or African American, 0.0893% of the population is American Indian or Alaska Native, and 0.0446% of the population is Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islanders.
At Princeton, 41% of the population is white, 28 are Asian, 11 are Hispanic, 9 are Black, 7 are multiracial, and 3 are unknown. At Carnegie Mellon, 29.7% of the population is white, 29.6% is Asian, 18.5% non-resident, 18.9% Hispanic, and 4.3% Black.
At UC Berkeley, 30.6% are Asian, 25.4% are white, 16.3% Latino, 5.5% multiracial, 2.42% Black, 0.139% Native Hawaiian, and 0.132% other Pacific Islanders. Last of all, Harvard. 39.7% of Harvard University's enrolled student population is white, 13.7% of the population is Asian, 9.46% of the population is Hispanic or Latino, 6.56% of the population is Black or African American, 3.94% of the population identifies as having more than one race, 0.197% of the population is Native American Indian or Alaska Native, and 0.118% of the population is Native American or other Pacific Islanders.
Do y'all see what's happening? Every school he applied to doesn't have a black population of students over 10%. Harvard doesn't even have a black population of students over Asian Americans. But if you are black, he had a 95% chance of getting in. Like, what's going on here? Do y'all see what I'm talking about? Do you see how affirmative action is being used through blatant misinformation to push anti-blackness? Because black people aren't the major ethnic group getting into these schools. It's Asian Americans. And we almost certainly not the majority at these schools. It's white people. But they put the finger at us and we get blamed for everything. Why do you think that is? Well, I'm answering for you. It's because they hate black people. They are anti-black and I'm tired of being subtle about it.
I would say that anti-blackness is used as an excuse to get rid of it, right? Because the existence of affirmative action is in recognition of the fact that the system is unequal. That is what it is. The whole purpose of having affirmative action is the U.S. government saying, hey, this is a country that is systemically racist, that black people and other marginalized people have been denied opportunity and would continue to be denied opportunity based on the way that the institutions and the people that be in this country operate. So we are going to allow for diversity of race to be considered a positive as opposed to the negative. We are recognizing that the system already views it in to keep, black people out of these doors. So the anti-blackness is the reason affirmative action even comes into play. So it isn't that affirmative action is used to be anti-black, is that what they then say is, hey, because we are anti-black, because we think black people are inferior, because we don't think you deserve to be in our classrooms, because we don't think you're as intelligent as us, you should not, the playing field should not be leveled for you to make it more possible for you to be there, because we will then think the same things we think about you, which is why you need affirmative action in the first place. So you should get rid of it so that we don't think less of you when we already do.
Like, this post talking about some Harvard admitting more black people than any race is not true. It's not happening. It's not real. The black population at Harvard is 6.56%. But posts like this can still get hundreds of thousands of likes, and it can still get hundreds of thousands of views regardless. It gets even worse when you really look into John's story and realize that bro is being weaponized by an anti-civil rights strategist who is backed by white nationalists to end affirmative action, something that would actually benefit him instead of hurting him. Because don't get it twisted, depending on what stat you look at, the majority of Asian Americans support affirmative action. But the ones who don't support it are loud, and they weaponize themselves against it through their own organizations that don't support affirmative action, and most popularly through white nationalist-backed organizations by using black people as a scapegoat as to why they got rejected. Like, this story is so interesting to me because I think it represents everything that's been going on with affirmative action discourse. And I want y'all to keep these essential questions in your mind as I continue through this video, because I'm gonna really get into John Wayne and people like him later. Who gets blamed all the time for this? Who's pushing these stories and narratives? What nuance gets left out on purpose? What context and key details gets left out on purpose? And lastly, what's the true goal here? And who is this really gonna affect in the long run? And as I move on to the next part of this video, I want you to remember this last quote from John Wayne that I'm gonna bring up again later on in this video, which is, I feel like if I'm looking back 10 or 20 years from now, if I didn't do it, speak up, I'd be pretty upset with myself, because it's interesting what happens in this next story and what's gonna happen in 10 or 20 years from now.
Alright, so y'all just seen that corny ass shit.
So on to the second story, which, drumroll please, is the Supreme Court has banned affirmative action from all colleges and universities in the US. Fox News, you got what you wanted. John Wayne, you got what you wanted. Anti-civil rights strategist backed by white nationalists, you got what you wanted, because the Supreme Court loves setting us back 50 years with each decision that they make. So I wonder, will y'all now choose to focus on what's really going on and put your attention to the legacy admissions and rich parents who pay for their kids to get into these schools, which is the real reason why y'all weren't getting into these schools in the first place? Or are you just gonna blame black people again? You know, sometimes I really wonder, what's gonna be the excuse now? And are these same anti-affirmative action organizations and people who push that narrative gonna have the same smoke for legacy students now? We don't know the answer to these questions, but maybe y'all might surprise me, because now you have to focus on the real issues and what's really going on. Because y'all still won't be getting into these schools, but the rate at which legacy students get in will be the exact same or even higher. So now that affirmative action is over, now that it's gone, let's get into what's really going on. Now, this is something that's not just tied to Harvard, but it's tied to every elite school in America especially. And according to admissions site,
first things first, what exactly is considered a legacy at Harvard? A person who is linked to an alumnus of a school is known as a legacy. Typically, a legacy is the child of an alumnus. In most cases, more relatives such as aunts, uncles, and cousins are disregarded. Grandparents are counted on some occasions, but not always.
And it's wild how people focus so much attention on affirmative action, but somehow, some way, nobody put a magnifying glass or gave the same attention to the legacy students that get into these schools. It's like a thing that everyone knows about, but no one wants to talk about. Because if you're at some of these elite schools or have heard about them, you've seen or heard about the parents who donate libraries and statues to these schools. And the next semester, all of a sudden, you see their kid in your classrooms. Niggas want to talk about fairness and merit so bad, but when it comes to legacy admissions, that talk just goes out the fucking window because they contribute to the school and shit like that. And it really is that egregious, because you can find so many studies and stories like Harvard finds 43% of white students are legacy athletes or related to donors or staff. And while Harvard's legacy acceptance rate is around 33%, the overall acceptance rate is 4%. Like, I've never been that great at math, but
if 2 + 2 is 4, right? And 5 + 5 is 10, okay. What the fuck is this?
Got students literally debating at Harvard over affirmative action, even though the amount of legacy students there is more than the entire black population at the damn school. Anti-blackness is so funny sometimes, because Harvard's black population is under 10%. But the amount of legacy students there, depending on what study you look at, varies between 35% and 43%. And guess what people decide to focus all their attention towards when it comes to this? Also, I know y'all probably been waiting on me to mention this, but we don't even benefit the most from affirmative action. I'm not saying that we don't benefit from it at all, but the biggest group who benefited from it was white women. And not to start no diaspora bullshit, because we both lost, and we both gonna be arguing back and forth in the English language, mind you. A good portion of the black student populations at these schools aren't even African Americans. They're actually African students.
Like, that is a white supremacist myth, right? The idea that affirmative action is there to make unqualified black people, you know, get into positions that someone more. That's not the case. That's not what actually affirmative action is in any way, shape, or form, right? What it is just considering this interest, the fact that this person is black or comes from the community, as a positive thing, right? That's all it is, as opposed to the negative the schools would insist on looking at. But the reality is the black people, we still, like I said, we don't actually, in numbers, we do not benefit from affirmative action in mass. We don't. White women do. We do not, right? So we are not. That's why we're solely 6% at Harvard. We are still underrepresented everywhere. And the black people that go there are the most decorated black people that can be there. You know what I mean? I remember I have. And every learned black person I know can tell you an affirmative story where some racist, somebody, because that's how they think, that's how they feel, that's how they move through the world, and there's nothing. Racism is innately about dehumanizing us. So it doesn't matter what my resume is, what my transcript says, it doesn't matter what yours says, it doesn't matter what Ketanji says, they say it about everybody, because racism is literally about dehumanizing us as innately inferior and coming up with reasons and stuff to justify a prejudice that they were going to have. Anyhow, but in law school, when I got into law school, I graduated college with like triple honors, like cum laude, departmental honors, all the things, right? I applied to 11 law schools. I got in everywhere. You know, I got in everywhere. I got in multiple full scholarships, and I'm an international student. So I'm not just like a black American, like I'm not a black American. I'm not just a black person here. I am an immigrant, an international student. So there's an extra level of hardship, hard for me to get into schools here. Like statistically, U.S. law schools only let in about 3 to 7 international students per class, because it is fucking damn near impossible for us to get, work visa and everything after school. So they don't bother with us. It's very, very difficult. So it's hard. I had to be the most decorated, run circles around motherfuckers all of undergrad, right? So I get in everywhere. I got multiple full scholarships. I could go to St. John's on a full scholarship. Here goes a white boy, my 1L year, who fucking barely fucking graduated, like didn't even have a 3.0, didn't whatever, can say to me like, oh, I should be grateful for affirmative action, and that's why I got into school. Meanwhile, and then another time when I got my job when I became a public defender, when I was graduating law school, there's a white guy I know, I guess he would consider myself a friend. He would consider himself my friend, and he's a racist. But I remember when we met on an internship, funny enough, when we both applied to go to work at my job at the public defender's office. I had like 6 different legal jobs while I was in law school. 6 different, like, I worked at the defense office. I taught 9th grade law. I worked in an IP law firm, a personal injury law firm. I did everywhere. I clerked for an appellate division judge. I did all the things, a decorated bitch, right? I was on the mock trial team. I competed. I placed. Every reason why I run circles around him. He ain't do none of that shit at all, right? Like maybe I had one internship, had a DUI, blah, blah, blah. When he doesn't get, legal aid is actually incredibly competitive. It's a myth, right? That like, oh, public defenders, that, those who can, whatever, be public defenders. No, legal aid is the oldest and largest public defense nonprofit in the country. And like 10,000 people, like, I think it's like 10,000 people apply, maybe like 1,000 are interviewed, and 32 people were hired. Very hard, right? Like in terms of what the numbers are. I get the job, he doesn't get the job. And he's like, oh, I'm a diversity hire. I'm more credentialed than you, but it doesn't bother me none. Just like it shouldn't bother me, because you can't. There's no reason. If it's gonna bother you, you're gonna die, because there are always gonna be racists. Like that's what literally racism is. There are always gonna be a bunch of racist, non-black people issues. Even black people who internalize the anti-blackness, assuming these things and thinking these things, and they're gonna do it in the face of all statistics and logic, because metric doesn't matter in the face of racism. They don't give a fuck about none of that. But that is their myth. That is not true. That like the black people that are getting into these places and stuff are like. No, I remember my best friend, he has a story like that too, of one of our classmates in law school saying she got there because of affirmative action, and she asked him, well, what was your LSAT score? And he says her score higher than his. It's just lying. It's just foolishness. It's just literally, everybody knows as a black person, to get into these rooms, to get what they have, you have to be twice as good. And twice is probably an underestimation, right? You have to run circles around them. So this whole myth, that's them putting that out there. We need to stop responding to that talking point, because we legitimize the talking point. Every time we feel the need to like explain why it's different, if we have a lower score, but blah, 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 and try to, no, that's not even be explaining those differences, because the reality is that ain't what's happening. That's not what's happening at all. But who is running up the bag on affirmative action? Or who was? The white women. White women. Before affirmative action, I think, what was it? White women made up maybe 4% or something of the legal profession. Right after affirmative action, they make up 30%. Black people in the legal profession still make up under 5%. So who did help? Exactly.
Like, honestly, affirmative action wasn't giving what it was supposed to give. It didn't go far enough. And yet, all the focus is on us, and we get blamed because we're stealing spots. And I already showed y'all the black population at every school that John Wick applied to. And I was gonna do it in this part, but man, I had to show y'all what's really going on here. These schools be having low-ass acceptance rates, and not everyone gets in, especially black people. Because again, none of the schools that he applied to had a black population over 10%. None of them. If you want to focus on the real issues, then focus on how these class sizes are small as hell, even though these universities are big as fuck. Maybe they need to rework their entire process and accept more students. Maybe advocate on reworking the entire school system itself, so that all these schools in the same state get the same amount of money, instead of relying on property taxes in their district, which will make education equal. Talk about the legacy students that literally pay their way to get into these schools, since you want to talk about fairness and merit so fucking bad. And I know that these anti-affirmative action groups and people who are against affirmative action ain't gonna do that. It's gonna be up to the civil rights organizations and activists to stand up and force y'all to recognize real, because y'all still won't get into these schools. And unfortunately, we might see a drop in the POC student body at these schools that were already unrepresented in the first place, just like how it happened in California, for example. But watch how the legacy admissions rate stays the exact same or gets even higher. And as I close this part, I'm going to read a tweet by Alayami, which states, I don't know who needs to hear this, but white women have benefited more from affirmative action policies than any other demographic. The problem with always trying to hurt black people is that you inevitably end up hurting yourselves. Which leads me to ask the question,
so what now? The question that's on everyone's mind. But before we get into all that, one of the biggest factors that I noticed about why people have such a negative reaction towards affirmative action is all the misinformation and fake statistics that's been passed around about the topic. And with all the information that's out there, it's hard to gain a complete grasp on what nuance and key details are possibly being left out to control a story or situation. Because as we've seen, when the media and various other news sites push a certain narrative that they want to be told, it creates a space that only harms and furthers the marginalization of already affected groups, and in this context specifically, pushes anti-blackness through blatant misinformation. And honestly, I can't go for that. So, Ground News and I are here to help show you the full picture of what's being reported across the globe. So with this app, you see through mainstream media narratives to find out what's really going on. For every story, you get a quick visual breakdown of the news outlets covering it, their political biases, how factual the source is, which entity owns the source, and which countries are covering the story. As ThinkPeace Tribe's manager, while I was advising him throughout the research process for this video, he personally used Ground News to engage in research on affirmative action, see how factual the sources were, what entity owned the sources, and which political biases they had. Because my god, there was a lot of centrist BS in certain articles and stories about this topic. And by using ThinkPeace Tribe's link, ground.news/ThinkPeaceTribe, you can make reading the news easier, make informed decisions, and learn a bit more about the world you live in, locally and internationally. So support your favorite small, but not for long, black leftist creator who speaks real and brings you the best videos today. And most importantly, when you go to ground.news/ThinkPeaceTribe, you can sign up for a free trial to take control of the news you read and see through mainstream media narratives with Ground News. That's right, so many benefits that you can actually try out for yourself. Will people lock in and realize the error of their ways? Or will black people just get blamed again because it's easier to do that than to focus on the real issues? I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
So now that affirmative action is banned, the next question on everyone's mind is, what now? Because like I said, all the blame was put on us. All the attention was directed towards something that didn't even benefit us the most. Some schools didn't even implement it. So what's gonna be the excuse when you still don't get into these schools? Anti-blackness makes the world go round, so they'll come up with something. Cause I know Fox News got their dumbest writers and reporters making some shit up as we speak. But seriously, like, what's gonna be next on the chopping block? Are they gonna target FAFSA and minority scholarships next? Are white people gonna get rejected from these elite universities and apply to HBCUs, still get rejected, and then sue HBCUs? Are they gonna remove the check boxes for race when you're applying to these schools since it doesn't matter anymore?
Now that schools are no longer able to collect information about the applicant's race, how are we going to hold them accountable in ensuring that there's actual equitable admissions process across all the racial groups? Now, how are you going to tell that schools are not discriminating against Asians? Sure, schools are no longer allowed to ask about the applicant's race, but if an applicant's name is John Wang, what do you think he is? You think he's Latino? So then the next logical suggestion is, well, why don't you just blind their names? Okay, well, this particular applicant was on the badminton team in high school and played piano all their life. What do you think their race is? This is why blinding resumes don't work, because people can fairly easily pick up on all of these demographic characteristics through other portions of the resume, and sometimes blinding resumes can actually make things worse because people let their biases go unchecked because they're like, oh, I don't know anything about the person because I don't see their name, even though they're unconsciously picking up on all of this information. And so in our quest to tackle discrimination against Asians in the admissions process, we could have just focused solely on that, but instead we just threw out affirmative action altogether, which makes it now even more difficult for us to hold these schools accountable in ensuring that the admissions process is equitable across all of these racial groups. And so now if you try to challenge these schools and saying, oh, you're discriminating against Asians, the schools will be like, how could we? We don't know. We don't know their race. We don't collect this information. How could we be racist now? And if you believe that all affirmative action did was accept all of these unqualified black students into the program, then after affirmative action was banned in California in the 90s, UC Davis went from 3% black students in 2000 to 14%. Sounds like to me they were qualified after all.
And while I'm on that, we also got to get into how the Supreme Court eliminated affirmative action in colleges except for military academies. Like, they aren't being subtle about it anymore, not like they were being subtle in the first place. And Victor the Creator made a great video about this, but now they are telling us to our faces that brown and black people can die for the military, but we can't get access to higher education. I mean, let's keep it real, because this is exactly what's going on. You got niggas like Clarence Thomas that got to where he was because of affirmative action and gets paid off by billionaires to make the decisions that he does. Like, bro climbed the ladder and got to the highest position in government because of affirmative action, and now he's trying to make sure that nobody can get the same access to higher education that he got. But best believe I'm not just on his ass. I'm on John Roberts, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. I'm on all y'all niggas next, man. And we gotta deal with this shit for as long as they're alive, which also makes me think about how stupid the Supreme Court really is. Like, they can make these life-altering decisions for the entire country, and we can't even elect these niggas? Like, what kind of democracy is this? Cause shit like this is gonna keep happening, and unsurprisingly, it didn't stop with Roe v. Wade being overturned. There's no more affirmative action, no student loan relief. Businesses can legally discriminate against LGBTQIA+ Americans. Indigenous peoples can't even get access to water from their own fucking land. Women don't have full bodily autonomy. Like, do y'all see what's going on here?
Affirmative action was already explicitly on the chopping block. Like, even if we didn't have this kangaroo court, they were coming for affirmative action. But then regardless, and I have a video about this on my YouTube called Your Rights Are in Danger, like or won't end in abortion, something like that. Where I explain, like, I go through like the Supreme Court, like the actual doctrinal thread, right? So there's a case called Griswold versus Connecticut, where like we have substantive due process is really established. That right there, when they establish substantive due process in that case, they use that rationale to come up with the right to abortion, to come up with the right to interracial marriage, to come up with the right to engage in same-sex relationships, to become the right to gay marriage, the right to a significant amount of our civil liberties are quite literally anchored in that. So when they overturned Roe, they like explicitly, they hacked at the foundation of that, but then they literally said, you know, and Clarence Thomas was very clear and explicit that they intend, the hope is to come after all of these different individual rights, except the right to interracial marriage, because you know he's not gonna let anything get in between him and his MAGA mommy. Okay, so yeah, no, it doesn't stop at affirmative action. Honestly, affirmative action is going to be the least of our worries.
RBG, when I catch you, just know it's on site. After I'm done with Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, and Margaret Thatcher in hell, just know I'm coming for you next, buddy. Trust. And honestly, this last part of the video is probably the most important part to me, because we also need to talk about how people have been using affirmative action to create division amongst minority groups, push white supremacy, entitlement, and the infamous model minority myth. And we'll get into all that and more right after the break.
Now go ahead and send me money, yeah! Money, cash.
Bro, they need to put cocaine back in fucking Coca-Cola cans. And hear me out.
with yellow jaundice, and segregation killed him. Yeah.
Went to Tulsa, OKC about a month ago. Native reservations, tornadoes, and nowhere else to go. But I won event cause I got fucked up stories on God, this shit been working. Kinda trauma dumping, booking therapy and breaking generational curses. Fuck them old niggas who say you don't need it, it's worth it. Niggas fucked up in the head and I'm trying to get right. I'm trying to unpack all this shit and go forward in life. So let me tell y'all niggas about the BS that I done been through. Cause really I just needed somebody to vent to.
Oh, it didn't go well? The white people didn't welcome you with open arms? What? Sit elsewhere, B.I.G.
Let's have a hard conversation about the modern minority myth and how this relates to affirmative action. Because like I said before, you look at the lawsuits that were reviewed by the Supreme Court with Harvard and UNC, and you'll see this loud minority of Asian Americans and white people that don't support affirmative action have basically teamed up for using black people as a scapegoat to get it removed. I focused on the John Wing story a lot throughout this video, but he isn't the only one. We can look at Calvin Yang, for example, who also got in contact with Edward Bloom to weaponize his identity to fight against affirmative action. And the funny shit about this is that bro is Canadian, and he want to talk about some damn today's decision has started a new chapter in the saga of the history of Asian Americans. Like, again, it wasn't black people's fault you didn't get in. Most likely, your essay sucked ass. World chapter in the saga of the history of Asian Americans. Like, yeah, your writing and sentence structure is shit. That's why you didn't get in. Now, before I could keep going and keep naming examples, but the common theme here is that they got rejected from these schools, wondered why, and then pointed the finger at black people as to why they didn't get in. Then they team up with anti-affirmative action groups backed by white nationalists and call it a win for Asian American students, when in reality, they ended up fine. Like, John Wang is at Georgia Tech right now, and Calvin Yang is at UC Berkeley right now. Instead of realizing that these schools have extremely low acceptance rates, low class sizes, and you aren't guaranteed to be accepted because of your high GPA and SAT scores, we are seen as a problem. It's this wild sense of entitlement where you boast yourself up as better than everyone else, and then when you get rejected, you have to find someone to blame, because it can't be you, right? And I'm not just talking about Asian Americans here, I'm talking about white people too. Like the way that white people, and some, not all, but some Asian Americans have used white supremacy and the modern minority myth to get what they want with this is truly wild to see. And I really hate to see it because it creates this already long divide between Asian Americans and black people, which is what white people want. When Fox News aired that John Wang story, what did you think that they were trying to accomplish with this? When people spread all this misinformation about affirmative action, what do you think is the true goal here? They've actively used anti-blackness to convince people that something which helped them was somehow hurting them, and it worked! Because affirmative action is gone, and when y'all still don't get into these schools, you can't use us as a scapegoat anymore. So what are you going to do? I just need y'all to recognize how this type of anti-affirmative action propaganda got pushed by the media to create this division between us and push white supremacy, because we are stronger together than we are with all this division between us. And adhering to the modern minority myth won't bring you closer to whiteness or closer to certain opportunities. It will only separate you from the communities of people that actually support you and have your back. The reason y'all can even be at these schools and ironically fight this hard against affirmative action in the first place is because black people fought to get the Civil Rights Act passed, which led the way for the Immigration and Nationality Act to get passed. And the modern minority myth doesn't benefit y'all in the ways that you think it does, because it forces Asian Americans to adhere to this ridiculously high standard of being the most educated and being the smartest person in the room, to where if you don't hit that bar or exceed it, people will legitimately question your Asianness. Also, gotta look inwards and apply some intersectionality and resources in this motherfucker, because there is also Asian phobia within the black community that needs to be checked. Like, when I posted my first video on TikTok reacting to the affirmative action situation, I got tons of anti-Asian comments from some, not all, but some black people that found the video that I had to delete because it was so disgustingly racist. And if you want to learn more about this and find the resources that are specifically talking about this, then I tell you to start at Format and the Foreign Lands video about Asian phobia within the black community, and Ali Sunvia's video about how the Asian modern minority perpetuates anti-blackness, because this division has historical ties that I can't do justice in this video alone. But how it relates to this affirmative action situation is what I asked before as the essential questions in the first part of this video. Who gets blamed all the time for this? Who's pushing these stories and narratives? What nuance gets left out on purpose? What context and key details gets left out on purpose? And lastly, what's the true goal here, and who is this really gonna affect in the long run? Because in 10 to 20 years, everyone who was against it so hard is gonna be pretty upset with yourself because you spoke up about something that wasn't happening. Because you used your marginalized identity to blame black people instead of focusing on the real issues. Because Asian American students like yourself still won't get into these schools, but white legacy students will. And not to be no hotep shit, but because you played right into the white man's game and didn't realize it.
What you're innately saying, every time they have this conversation, all they're saying is that black people are not deserving, black people are not intelligent, black people shouldn't be there, because we make up, first of all, Asians make up in these Ivy Leagues, they're talking about or whatever, like 30% of the student body, far more than black people do, right? So they're saying, hey, the 3 black people in the classroom, you're looking at a whole white institution with a sizable Asian population, but God forbid, if 3 black people are in a seat or black people occupy any seat, you perceive it as they shouldn't be there because you see this as belonging to white people. The reason why you see these, there's only a hand, it's not reflective of the entire Asian community, but obviously those that are pushing this Asian model minority myth and coming after black people and affirmative action and all this foolishness. The reason that they don't come after white, they don't say, hey, my spot is being denied to me because white people are sitting in those seats, is because the implicit understanding here in American society is that it belongs to white people. It's theirs to give and invite the rest of us how they feel, right? Because so they would never have that conversation. But you know what a society will be open to hearing? That black people, you know what I mean? That shouldn't be there. And that's what that's about. Because the reality is this: why do you feel entitled to to go to any school or anything like this? Like, we shouldn't even have to debate these things on the merit on what his actual thing is, or look what the other Americans. Regardless, why this basically comes down to ownership, like how white ownership, the same way they view the country and the way they view the communities, when they feel like they can travel to other people's communities, like the Rittenhouse, because that's their streets to protect from protests and things, even though they don't live there, because they see it as theirs. And that's what ultimately this conversation is about, is the fact that, people keep bringing up like legacy admissions and all these different things. It's irrelevant to them. Like, when you bring that up and you're like, oh, well, you got in with legacy, because they see it as theirs. That's what we're not missing the point. They see it innately, inherently. What is keep being implicitly said to us is that white is superior. This is white supremacy talking. That white people are innately more deserving, that these are white people's institutions, that white people are smarter innately. So they don't care about any of the substantive argument, because what it basically will always be is that this is white America and me, the Asian, when they're making this, stereotype and making these arguments, is that as the model minority Asian person, I am closer in proximity to whiteness, right, than this black person. So why, even if it's far less black people, there's just way more Asians, there shouldn't be any black people there. If there's a white institution, you should be rewarding those of us closer in proximity to whiteness.
But I actually have hope for the future and hope that niggas start getting their act together. more and more I see Asian Americans recognizing that adhering to the modern minority myth is making them lose solidarity with the communities of people that actually give a fuck about them. When you look at the stats, a good amount of Asian Americans supported and protested for affirmative action and stood with black people in solidarity like they have in the past. This video was being made way before that affirmative action decision was announced, and honestly I was gonna tackle this in such a different way, but that decision really changed everything. Something I realized was how misinformation gets fueled and creates this mindset where you don't lock in on the real issues and blame black people instead because it's easier to do so. And before I go, I got one last message to all my black students at these Ivy League schools or any school where you're going to get access to a higher education. I'm bringing out the metaphor for this actually, because y'all look. These niggas done lost their everlasting minds, and I need these black students to recognize like what the hell is actually going on. And like, look, I don't know if the megaphone is gonna like become like a thing for this channel, but like whenever y'all need to hear me, just know I'm bringing this out. And to all my black students, y'all gonna hear me on this one. And a headphone warning, by the way. Yeah. You deserve to be at the school that you're at. You aren't there because you weren't given a handout. And you aren't there because of your race alone. You worked your ass off to be there, and you deserve every opportunity that you're receiving. Do great things. Be the best person that you can be. And last but not least, fuck all these niggas that say you don't deserve to be there. And fuck all these niggas that don't want you to be there. Shit, one thing about Think Peace Tribe is that I'm rooting for everybody black, and I'll continue to do so until I die. You feel me? But yeah, that's all I have to say for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.
Thank you all for watching this video. Subscribe to my Patreon, subscribe to my second channel for various commentary videos, stream my new song on YouTube and SoundCloud, and yeah, thanks for watching my videos and supporting me per usual. Okay, bye.